All right, everybody, welcome back live at Drew's house. Another edition from the studios in Newburyport. Getting into a good little rhythm here, being back in the Newburyport studios. I'm very excited about that. We got Sarah Blackstone producing today. As always, hello, Sarah. And our guest today is somebody I've never actually met in person in the studio before, Sean Goguen, but he is a big part of this radio station. Got a couple shows on here, Brave New World and World of Jazz, and I'm excited to meet him. Sean, how are you? Thanks for coming in today.
Good. Glad to have this opportunity. I love talking about music.
Well, so do I. So this is a good spot for you. You ready for spring, first of all?
Oh, yeah. It doesn't feel like it today.
I know.
Yeah.
We're getting
I was
there.
Enjoying it before.
I know. It is weird, New England, right? Well, tell us, I'm sure people have heard your show, opposite different times than this one, but tell us a little bit about what you do, because Brave New World, I've heard a lot about. I know Sarah, the boss, likes to talk about it too. So let's start there. Brave New World, and it's a little different show.
That's a weird one.
It's a weird one.
Ever since I was a kid, I've always gravitated towards music that has no commercial appeal whatsoever. I like weird stuff. I like noisy stuff. When I was a teenager, I was into hardcore punk, heavy metal, all this crazy stuff, industrial music, and I don't listen to heavy metal anymore, really, but I've always continued to enjoy music on the cutting edge that really pushes boundaries and challenges the listener.
All right, now who are the early influences? I want to stop you there before you go too far. Who are the ones that jumped out at you right away?
The Stooges, Throbbing Gristle, Motorhead. They're still my favorite band.
Still?
I love Motorhead. I don't play them on the show, but the Velvet Underground.
Yep.
And I play, those are some of the bigger names.
Okay.
Most of the stuff I play in the show are from the underground, the musical underground stuff, artists that no one's ever heard of. I also play some 20th century, 21st century classical music as well, because, avant-garde music didn't just fall out of the sky.
Yeah.
It started, in my opinion, back in the turn of the century with guys like Arnold Schoenberg, Alban Berg, those composers, and music has progressed since then. So I try to give some context, a historical context.
It's not the easiest thing to turn people onto either, because you go out and see music. You people like to sing along. I mean, I have musicians that come in here, and sometimes they say, just play my original stuff, which is kind of poppy. People don't even listen to because they can't sing along to it.
That's
so
right.
Never mind your stuff. That's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. A lot of the stuff that I play, people say, "Oh, that's just noise."
Yeah.
And, I sound like a nut by saying this, but noise has become a form of music.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a while to get into it. But the thing is, some of the better, I'm going to call them noise musicians, some of the better noise musicians, if you listen carefully, the noise is actually very layered. And I see similarities to modernist classical music. There's different layers, there's different dynamics.
Yep.
And if you get it out of your head that every piece of music has to be notated on a piece of paper and it has to be singable, if you get that out of your head, you can open your mind to some really cool music, and that's what I feature on the show.
Was there a show that got you? Because somebody has to open that door for you. Was there a show that got your attention? Was it parents? Was it a sibling? I don't know what it was.
No, it was a show. When I went to Boston College back in the '80s, and there was a show that I loved. It was called No Commercial Potential.
Okay.
And it played exactly this kind of music, played a lot of industrial music.
Was it college radio?
It's college radio.
All right. Some of the best stuff out there is I love good college radio.
Well, that's what got me into punk rock.
That's right.
Is college radio.
It's such a good, actually, I just want to steal that moment because that's how I started too. And now I work for WBZ in Boston, but I recommend that to anybody. Unfortunately, I've heard some college radio stations have gone away, but I recommend the college radio to anybody. It is such a good learning ground. Even if you don't know what you want to do, you can just being on the air, usually have a chance to do that. You can learn how to, number one rule, somebody's always listening.
Yep.
Some of my friends learned that the hard way, but behind the scenes, you get to learn how to make a show. It's a great thing. So I love the college radio.
Oh, totally.
Any chance I get,
listen to it. WERS is my favorite.
Yep, Boston has so many great options for that.
Totally.
So it's cool. But sorry to digress.
No problem.
But so it was the college radio show. So you listen to that every day, you say?
Almost every day. It was, music, industrial music and experimental music has gone a long way since then.
Yeah.
That show played a lot of long, droning tunes, which I play on my show as well.
Yep.
Some electronic music. But since then, like I said earlier, noise has become a big part of the underground scene.
Yeah.
And I love it. I mean, there's a lot of junk out there, and I try to avoid that on the show. But, sometimes if you tune in not expecting, you'll think that there's something wrong with the signal. There's just like, it sounds like a buzzsaw cutting through metal or something.
So there's people might actually think they're hearing that. Like, what other kind of things might people pick up on? Not the trained ear, let's say.
Not the electronic music. About half the stuff I play on the show is electronic music. A lot of it's melodic.
Yep.
So electronic music has never had a big following, and the biggest, I think its heyday in terms of popularity was the 80s when a lot of pop bands were using it. I don't play any of that stuff. I play like legitimate electronic music composers from the current day. And I play some stuff from the early days in the 40s and 50s just to give some context of see where the music's evolved. But yeah, about half the music I'll play you can actually listen to and not have to take an aspirin after,
About half.
Yeah, I love electronic music, so I want to give exposure to a lot of little known artists. They need our support.
It's very cool. Yeah,
they need our support.
Certainly do.
Spend money, buy their music.
Absolutely. Is there something you personally get out of it before you just know you like it? Like I know some people will listen to music to relax, or maybe a long day, relieve some stress, whatever the reason may be. Do you find some feeling from it? Do you get something that benefits you?
I find it cathartic. It is relaxing. What I love about experimental music is the spontaneity of it, which is why I love jazz, and I'll talk about that other show that I have, World of Jazz.
Yeah.
Most of the music that I play on Brave New World is totally improvised. So you're not talking about someone that is playing a Bach cantata on sheet music. This is completely improvised. People who are very traditionalist view on music, like people who are traditional classical music fans, and that's my other passion, have a hard time with improvised music because they say, well, hey, you just get up there and play anything. Well, it's not that simple. That's what makes the music exciting. You never know what you're going to hear. And for me, it gives me a lot of energy. It makes me feel good. I just love the spontaneity of it.
So let's combine those two worlds for a second, because your other show is World of Jazz.
Yep.
Which is a more, I guess, maybe the more standard structured of the two.
Yeah, it's more mainstream.
So I think people might have a tough time rationalizing that you are the host of World of Jazz, but you also have this love for this other style of music. They seem to clash. I bet a lot of people would look at the jazz world and go, why is he into all the screaming, headbanging, saw music as well? That might be a tough thing for people to rationalize.
Actually, it is pretty easy to explain. That's a good question, because I can explain through this why I asked for permission.
You've had to do this before, haven't you? Huh? You've had to explain this before, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I did. I started Worlds of Jazz about a year and a half ago.
Yep.
I was given this great opportunity to do what I've wanted to do since I was a child. I've always wanted to be a DJ.
Yeah.
I didn't pursue it because my parents said, you never make any money doing it. So I'm a lawyer instead. But it was always a dream that I think the seed was planted, God planted a seed in my soul a long time ago for this.
Yeah.
And the opportunity arose. I always wanted to have a jazz show because I've loved jazz since the late 70s. My father was a big jazz fan, and he turned me on to guys like George Benson, Grover Washington Jr., stuff that was popular in the 70s. And I play the saxophone as well, so I like playing jazz too. And my greatest role model is Eric Jackson. He is he's a legend in Boston radio. He's known as the Dean of Boston Jazz. And he has been the host of Eric in the Evening on WGBH for the past 40 years. Yep. I started listening to it when he first started the show, and I still listen to it.
Yeah.
He is the best DJ in the world for jazz, and he's one of my music heroes, and he's been a role model for me. I wish I could tell him, but I always wanted to be like him.
Yeah.
And WJOP gave me that opportunity. I only wish I could be as good as him. But I've always loved jazz. when I first started the show, I was trying to put a wide variety of jazz. I was playing old school stuff from the 1910s, 1920s, some smooth jazz, some avant-garde stuff, and then as I got more comfortable with the show, I kind of eased away from the older stuff, and I really am focusing mostly on current day jazz artists.
Okay.
Because they really need the exposure. I play classic stuff too, but I really want to give exposure to these young, starving artists out there who don't get a lot of exposure.
And does it bother you the kind of the lack of jazz? I know it's not thrown in the face of like kids these days. You know, they you don't see it on the Grammy Awards earlier. You don't see it in your face. And does that bother you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it
thought.
does.
Yeah.
It does because a couple of reasons. One, you're talking about super virtuoso musicians here.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about technical ability, musical ability that's just out in the stratosphere. And most people don't recognize it because they're not exposed to jazz. The other thing is, I mean, jazz is one of the only truly American forms of music. It's a tribute to Black history. It really is. Mm-hmm. It's I think it's unfortunate that these days you don't see as many Black musicians recording jazz in this country as in the early days, because Black America, this is their music. They created it. They're the people that moved the music forward and continue to. But now, when jazz became more acceptable to,
I mean, the influences are everywhere. I mean, even some of these new artists here coming up. I mean, you can hear some of the influence that that melting pot that's jazz threw into the culture and everything.
That's right.
I mean,
jazz came from the blues.
Yeah.
I mean, blues is American music.
Right.
I mean, plain and simple, it's American music, the most American music, and there would be no jazz without blues.
Yeah.
And the best jazz musicians you'll hear a blues influence, and I try to really focus on that on the show.
Yeah, every jazz artist I've ever had that has come in here and played, even just get jazz guitar players that will come in, they'll tell you that what was really good for them was, I mean, obviously you have to be talented, but it taught them like structure and like that they were able to apply to life too. It was they always come back to the groove and just certain rules that there are rules, even though it's improvised, like even improvised players, there are rules to that, which is what makes it so fascinating, and all those people, but they've said they've been able to apply it to life as well. Thought that was interesting. Just structure of a band and structure of staying with people.
Well, I mean, jazz is a very collaborative effort.
Yeah.
I mean, the best jazz musicians are the best listeners.
Yeah.
The worst bands, including rock or anything, are bands that don't. They just do their own thing. They don't listen to one another.
Right.
I remember Eric Clapton once said his Cream, the band Cream, one of the reasons they fell apart, other than being burned out, was that their egos got so big that they stopped listening to each other on stage.
Yeah.
And it basically is three guys competing against one another. That's not good music.
Story of, not the only story. And when it comes to bands, it's so hard to keep bands together. It fascinates me, some of these, like the Rolling Stones, some of these bands that have been able to do it for all these years are just, it's hard. I mean, you have to, one, stay alive. I remember reading Springsteen's book, and he goes, we've been able to do things that a lot of bands haven't been able to. One, stay alive. Mostly they've started to lose some people. But two, mostly get along. But I mean, these guys, at some point, you end up having not to hang out with them in your free time because you're seeing so much of them all the time. But, it is. I've always loved those stories of great band stories. But certainly. So with those two worlds, I'm glad we talked about both of them. Again, Sean Goguen two shows. Brave New Worlds, the experimental one we started with. World of Jazz is kind of the more structured one. Do you have a favorite of the two?
I have a little more. I love doing both. I look forward to recording them every week because they're all pre-recorded.
Yeah.
I look forward to doing Brave New World a little bit more because there's a wider range and the music's much more daring.
Yeah.
The reason I had asked to do Brave New World was because when I first started the World of Jazz show, I was throwing in some experimental tunes because I love the music.
Yeah.
And I would sometimes, people who tune in, click on one of my old shows, you'll hear look, I know this isn't quite jazz, but I think it's important that we open our minds to this. And it was getting to a point where I was having a hard time fitting it in.
Yep.
So I asked Sarah, I said, look, could I do an experimental? Because I want to have a separate show for this stuff.
Yeah.
And she said, sure. And I was like, oh, this is awesome.
I can imagine. Do you ever get has anybody just stopped you and said, I really don't appreciate that sort of music?
I'm waiting for that to happen. Yeah, I've actually been concerned about that. I always wonder if I get shut down. But one thing I'm careful, I make sure there's no swearing or anything.
Right.
That's one thing I've told. But, got a pretty diverse music program here on the station. So,
yes.
One time you're playing, Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, and then you're hearing Search and Destroy by the Stooges.
Yeah.
It's kind of a shock to your system.
Does any of this, do you see any influences from that kind of, because it's a lot of I guess, I'm 35, so think of the music of like the, young 20-year-olds are listening, kids coming out of high school now. Do you see any of that stuff kind of leaking into that, into the newer music? Because there are some new artists that are doing things that I'm like, it's kind of, I'm not sure I'm into that, but it's different. Okay.
Well, I have two kids.
Yeah.
My son is into heavy metal and punk, so he doesn't listen to that. My daughter listens to some more popular stuff. The little that I'm hearing, I don't hear a lot of it. However, except in hip hop.
Yep.
I love hip hop music. I don't like the stuff that's really popular. I like the underground stuff. And I have noticed that there are a lot of hip hop bands that are using noise in their beats. I think, Public Enemy's always was a big, big influence, I think, in a lot of these groups.
Yep.
And I think I'm planning on playing some Public Enemy on next week's show.
Ooh, little tease. Good for you.
Oh, yeah. But they were a very innovative hip-hop band for many reasons, and one of which is just the samples that they use. Many of them were just like ear-ripping samples. And I'm hearing that in a lot of underground hip-hop music. Well, not a lot, but some of it. And that, I will play that stuff on the show.
Yeah.
I love that stuff.
That's good. So is your son following more in your footsteps, you think? Is he scaring you a little bit?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's taking my electric guitar. He's playing the guitar now. And he's learning Black Sabbath riffs and Iggy Pop riffs and stuff.
Going to be a loud house pretty soon.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. What's was there somebody, so you play saxophone?
I also play guitar.
Little guitar. What, did you pick that up on your own too? Or,
saxophone, I was actually received classical training when I was like 12.
Yeah.
So I was formally trained in that. Guitar I learned on my own. I play classical music and jazz. I attempt to play jazz. So
what makes you go to the saxophone? Because, guitar is a little more common, but saxophone isn't always, well, I think it's very cool. It always, when you're young, it's not always I want to, it's not the best way to.
Well, I got in back in the early 80s, I had already been into guys like John Coltrane and Grover Washington Jr.
Right.
They were my two saxophone heroes, and I wanted to sound like them. So I told my parents, I said, hey, look, can I get a saxophone? And I played for many years. I gave it up for a while, and I just recently picked it up again. I play soprano saxophone. I play in church. And
I was going to say, because that's common. I know that. Or you jump in. Did you ever play in a band? With the
Not
saxophone?
my own band. I played in the jazz band in high school.
High school jazz, yeah.
Yeah, but I've never been in my own band.
Yeah, gotcha.
Unfortunately, I just don't have the time.
Well, yes, that is time is something you need when you're a saxophone player in a band.
Right.
What's did you enjoy playing for the school band? Because that's a whole different animal too when you have to play for.
I liked it because I was the only guy in the band that was willing to improvise.
Yeah. How'd the director feel about that?
He loved it. No, he didn't like the fact that everyone else was classically trained and everything. And the problem with a classical training, it's great because it teaches you great technique, but it's very rigid. And it makes you feel like, oh, what if I play the wrong note? If you're afraid of playing the wrong note, you should never play jazz because you're not gonna have the freedom, you're not gonna have the soul that's required to play it well. And I went to my director. I said, "Hey, man, I want to. Can I grab a solo?"
Yeah.
And he was cool. He let me do it.
Love that request, probably. Huh?
I did. Yeah. And I had, I also had a saxophone teacher who was a jazz cat, and he just he had the opposite. He said, "Okay, we're going to start. We're going to tune up. Just play.
Yeah.
Play whatever comes to your mind." I'm like, "Really?" And that took away the fear of improvising.
Wow.
I'm not that good at it, but it's fun.
That's a great thing to learn.
Yeah.
Sean Goguen joining us. Where are you from, Sean? What's the history here? Born and raised locally or elsewhere?
No, I was originally grew up in Natick.
Okay.
Went to Natick High School. I moved to Newburyport 19 years ago.
All right. So you're a regular now. 20, I hear, is the
20. Yeah,
they've had enough time to check you out at
it'll
that point.
It'll be 20 in September.
20 years in September. Good for you. You like it here?
Yeah,
It's a great spot, isn't it?
yeah. I love being near the ocean.
I know, it's great. What do you think about the Newburyport music scene? Want a little more, I bet. We've been
I've
like so many towns.
I've only been to classical music concerts, and I like the chamber music festival every year.
Yep.
I go. Oh, I'm going to put a plug in.
Okay.
Right here.
Always fine.
For the Roots concert.
There you go.
Series over at Belleville Congregational Church.
Yep.
Those shows are awesome. I mean, it's quite a variety. It's a lot of roots music, a lot of blues, country. There's folk music, and the Belleville Meeting House has the best. I'm convinced has the best acoustics on the North Shore. I went to a show.
High standards.
Huh?
That's high standards. Okay.
It is, and I went to one show last year. Well, before COVID, and the band. It was an electric band. They were bluegrass. They were bluegrass. And near the end of the set, they said, "Man, the acoustics are awesome in here." They just shut off all their mics, shut off the amplifiers. They just played acoustically, and they were like, "This is awesome." So,
well, we get that a lot about this room too when musicians come in. So I always said,
"Oh yeah,
it's good. It actually is a good room."
Oh, is it? Okay.
It is a good room. Yeah.
I thought you were being sarcastic.
No. We do. We take high praise in this room. So I'm not joking about that one. How about church sounding? Is that you're playing saxophone in a church? That's going to be it depends on the church probably, but are some churches better sounding than others?
Acoustically?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bet they are.
Oh, absolutely.
Any tricks to playing a church?
Well, you have to really go along with what the music director is. You got to be
less
playing.
Improvising.
No, I mean, it depends what church. There's some room for it.
Is it?
I was going to the Belleville church. The pastor is a musician.
Oh, that helps.
And so he was very open-minded with music. So he would let me play, get up and improvise a bit. So it got my stage fright cured.
Yeah.
And
because were you playing churches young?
I'm sorry?
Were you playing at a young age? Were you playing churches?
No. This is
later in life?
just the past few years. I would play classical guitar, sometimes electric guitar, and the saxophone over at Belleville.
Yeah.
And it was just a great experience. The people appreciate it. And, a couple of times where I had so much stage fright, I was screwing up, messing up. I was playing a classical piece. One time I literally got up and said, "You know what? I give up." And I just walked off the stage.
Oh, really?
I was so embarrassed. Yeah. I made an idiot of myself.
I mean, that's, you're not the first person to do that either. The stage fright is a real thing. I mean, some of the best musicians in the world have stage fright.
Still?
Yeah. Van Morrison says he gets shaken before he goes on stage. He visibly, and there's other ones too. I mean, there's certain guys, like I remember, the Springsteen I was talking about earlier, awkward in old interviews, like Letterman one day, you watch an interview, he literally calls backstage for a guitar because he's so unnervy, just not knowing where to put his hands, and he needed the guitar to just strum and have a conversation. Very
Bob Dylan was like that too.
Oh, yeah.
He was an odd duck in an interview.
Was? I think, although I saw he's still touring. I mean, I think he's literally going to die on stage like he promised decades ago. But how about that stuff? Do you get into that? Because that's a whole different
folk music.
Yeah, a whole different repertoire.
I like it. I don't listen to a lot of. I do like Bob Dylan. I mean, he's considered by many to be America's greatest composer, greatest songwriter. I don't listen to a lot of it, but I do appreciate it. I go through phases,
right?
And I can appreciate Joni Mitchell and people like.
But you're not. They tend not to be at the front and center of what you're listening to on that day. Yeah.
Not really. It's
what is it today? What are you listening to? Like before the show, what are you listening to?
I listen to stuff I play on my show.
Yeah.
I listen to jazz, and I listen to crazy experimental and electronic music. It's and classical music. When Sarah offered me, the opportunity, Sarah Hayden, to have a radio show, I was seriously debating doing a chamber music show, a classical music show.
Right.
And I actually flipped a coin and decided to do jazz because I always wanted to do jazz. But if I had the time and the offer ever came, I'd be happy to do a classical music show.
Wow, that's funny. So you could have gone either way. Literally flipped a coin.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That's you're a lawyer too. That's in the lawyer playbook.
Oh yeah.
That is funny. Do those worlds intersect at all? Have you ever have a? I get it. They're very different worlds.
Well,
anything you take from the music world that
actually,
you can apply?
yeah, okay.
You got it.
Mary Jacobson asked me this question. I mentioned how jazz is an important part of Black American history. Mm-hmm. And jazz, particularly in the 60s, was used as a vehicle, one of the vehicles for the civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. Guys like Archie Shepp, Albert Eiler, I think Ornette Coleman used jazz, avant-garde jazz, as a means of expressing resistance against the establishment. And I play a lot of that on my show. I love that stuff. Mm-hmm. And about the struggles, Charles Mingus, one of the most outspoken jazz musicians. He was talking about racial justice before it became, the hippies were talking about it in the 60s. He was talking about it in the 50s.
Yeah.
And very outspoken about it. And, a lot of earlier in my practice, I represented a lot of Black clients. And many of whom were from the ghetto, in Boston. Many were incarcerated, and they would tell me their stories about the struggles they had to go through. And it's a lot of what they talked about are the same messages that I hear from a lot of these jazz cats from the '60s. How it got me to understand. I don't mean to turn this into a political thing, but I think it's, you asked the question. I do. My experience representing these people, I wish everyone had the experience because it opened my eyes to how Black Americans have hurdles that they have to jump over that none of us white folks have to struggle with. You hear a lot in the press about, guilty while driving while black, those kind of things. There's a lot of truth to that. And
so you've seen those injustices,
I spent a lot of time trying to get a lot of my clients out of jail. I used to be a criminal lawyer, and one of the biggest, most eye-opening cases. Do you mind me talking?
No, I love it. Yeah, I love the
I had a case in my office. I had 4 other lawyers working on it. We represented 50 inmates at the Suffolk County House of Correction. Yeah. All but 2 of them were Black. Oh. And they were beaten up horribly by guards, mostly white guards.
What year?
What we did is we sued the sheriff's department. We sued all the guards for damages. What they would do is they would take Black inmates, they would throw them against the wall, they'd handcuff them behind their backs, and they'd beat the living hell out of them. They'd beat them. They beat them with steel-toed boots. They take their boots off and beat them up. Wow. And they would cover it up. They destroy the videos. They would write phony. I get really passionate about this.
Yeah, I can tell.
And they write up phony reports, phony officer reports to cover it all up. And the world doesn't know about this. These are people, I'm specifically talking about the incarcerated community.
Yeah.
These are people who don't have a voice because they're behind bars, and most people don't care.
It comes up every political go-around, too. Every time there's a presidential election, or it comes up, and it seems like then it dies.
They don't do anything about it.
And it's what is the state of the incarceration? I mean, you hear about all the issues, but it's obviously there are big issues right now, right? What is your take on it? As very generally, I know, but
Well, I've been out of the game for a while. I don't do any criminal defense work anymore. I think, from my experience, it's twofold. One, it's before, if we're talking about black Americans, it's been a long-standing problem. It's before they go to jail. It's when they're in front of the judge, in front of the prosecutor, in front of the probation officer. I think there's a perception that, and I don't even know if it's conscious. I don't think, whether it's conscious or not isn't the important point. The point is it exists. I think a lot of people, they see a black man, for example, coming in handcuffs. They bring him in front of the judge. He's charged with such and such a crime. Many times, in the criminal justice system, regardless of race, most people have a criminal record. I think many times the probation officer, the judge, looks at them and says, okay, this guy's got a record. And I think they look at him. Oh, you've been in jail before. They throw the book at him. And I think I think there's a prejudice that, and again, I don't know if it's conscious or not. I don't care if it is, frankly, but I think it's like, oh, he's been around. He's a street guy. He can handle it. And they just, no bail. Or they post some crazy bail that the guy obviously can't meet. That's the first thing. But I think the other thing is that most people aren't aware of in the prison population is that when they get out of jail, these people don't have any supports for them. Most of these people, their families have given up on them. They've gotten fed up. There's like, oh, he's without any, there's no cure for him. They get out of jail. Everyone thinks, oh, great, he's released from jail. He's got no place to go.
Yeah.
He has no job. How do you get a job when you got a criminal record?
Yeah.
So what do? They go back to crime. It's a terrible, vicious cycle. And I think politicians play lip service on this, and they don't do much of anything about it. If I'm going to give Donald Trump I am not a fan.
Yeah.
There's one good thing that he did was early in his administration, he passed a bill. He signed a bill that was, it's been a while, but that opened up job opportunities for people who had been incarcerated.
Yeah.
I question his motives for it, but he signed the bill. Great, fine. I'm glad you signed it. But that's a step forward, but so much more needs to be done.
Massive issue, yeah.
Am I over time? Am I going over time?
No, you're fine. We'll be fine.
I'm very passionate.
I
about this
try
issue.
not to watch the clock too much.
All right.
Sarah, let Sarah have the headaches with that one. Sarah Blackstone producing for us today. One more legal question, then we'll end with music.
Sure.
We'll bring it all forward. You defended a lot of people in criminal stories. I'm sure you saw some of the worst of the worst crimes. That it's always the tough part of that job. But I have some defense attorneys in my family. I know some other ones. And one thing they always say to me, because they get asked a lot, how do you do that? How do you see some of the stuff people have done and defend them? Or how do you do this? And usually it's because, well, a lot of times those stories aren't quite what they seem. A lot of times you do have somebody who's has a real good case. And it seems to be a lot of pride. There's something that they take out of that, defending the people that have no one defending for them. I'm saying that awkwardly. But there's something to that, right? That pride or that, I don't know. What is it? I'm not a lawyer. What is it that defending those people?
It's a couple issues. One, we have a constitution. The government always has the burden of proving that the person is guilty. Mm-hmm. And as defense attorneys, we put the police, well, not so much the police, but the prosecution to the task. You want to send my guy to jail? You better prove it. Mm-hmm. And that's our job, to make sure that they try to prevent them from proving it. That's the hard part of the job. We have a constitution to uphold, just like prosecutors have. They have their job to do. That's one thing that allowed me to do it. The other thing is a personal thing. I have a very strong anti-establishment streak in my personality. I may not look like it. I don't like authority very much. So I always wanted to stand up for the little guy. Yep. I always felt sympathetic to the guy that got, or woman, who got arrested.
Yep.
And
you like finding the good in people, too.
I like finding the good in people.
Yeah.
But, the thing that also makes it hard, I didn't have a hard time with it when I was practicing this form of law. But as I get older, too, is you do have to look at it from the police officer's perspective as well. You know, they're trying to do their job. I'm talking about a good police officer.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to do my job. I'm trying to enforce the law here.
Yeah.
And I got some guy who's going to pull a knife on me, or, cops are out. The rest of us had taken Labor Day weekend off. You got cops, they're out clean up messes that none of us have to clean up, and they see stuff that we don't have to deal with.
Right.
So I always try to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
That
I've had a chance to interview a few cops over the last few years, because obviously it's been such a news story with so many incidents happening across the country and protests on the streets of Boston, on the streets everywhere, suburbs of Boston as well. And it's interesting because the one thing that I've noticed with a lot of police officers is a lot of them are reluctant to go do interviews because they feel like they're being attacked.
Targeted.
Yeah. And it's interesting because most cops, I think most people would agree, most cops are good. And it's the bad ones do hurt the whole industry. We get that, just like any other industry, right? Like people in general, I like to think are good, but so many of them have a tough time kind of talking about it. And then when you sit down and actually have a conversation with police officers, you really do realize like this is what's going through their head during these certain moments.
Yeah.
And like, it's like, okay, yeah, I get that. I get that fear. And I don't know. I feel like more conversations about that stuff would be better,
Well, I think people's opinions of police officers might be even better. Maybe if they're willing to come on the air and explain, we're put in situations that we don't want to be in, but we have a job to do. And would you want to have my job?
Right.
No, I wouldn't.
Last time I was in that situation, the guy hit me with an elbow, and then I was knocked out.
Say, how's your mother?
Exactly.
I'm supposed to just.
It is interesting. I get it. I just feel like if more open conversations about those things would be good. I think we're getting there. The last couple of years, I think I've seen that a little bit. But anyway, back to the music to end the show. Okay, so Brave New World and World of Jazz, Sean Goguen, those are the two shows. Tell people again where they can find them, when they can find them, everything you want out there.
Sure. Okay, World of Jazz is on 3 times a week. We air a news show every Monday night from 5 to 7 p.m. And the show is repeated on Friday morning from 9 to 11.
Okay.
That's when I tend to listen. And then Saturday night from 7 to 9. The Brave New World show airs on Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. It's definitely nighttime music. And then it's now going to be rescheduled to be repeated on Sunday evenings, I believe from 8 to 10.
Nice.
It used to be on in the afternoons, but
Gotcha.
It's not really afternoon relaxing music.
End your week with that. It's going to surge you into the next week.
Yeah. I think the important thing to note, though, if you miss the show, though, you can always go on SoundCloud.com. It's SoundCloud.com/NCM Hub. You can download the shows. You can listen to them as many times as you want. Plus, it's a good way to track how many people are tuning in.
Exactly.
When you listen on the radio, you have no idea how many people are listening.
Well, hopefully you get more and more listeners here. It's been a pleasure to meet you, Sean Goguen. And
thank you.
We go in many different directions in the show. It always happens. You asked me before, what are you going to ask me? And I said, I have no idea. We'll see. You go in with a little structure. It's like jazz. You go in with a little structure, but then you got to play off it, right?
Yeah, just wing it, huh?
That's how it goes. It was great to meet you, though.
Hey, great to meet you.
Maybe I hope some of the listeners from my show can jump over and jump onto your show and at least try out some of the. Would you agree it's not for everybody? Some of the.
Yes, if you listen to Brave New World, you have to take out of your mind what your preconceived concept of what music is.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. All right, Sean Goguen, pleasure to meet you, man.
Right.
Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks for
Sarah
having me.
Blackstone, thank you as always. The best producer in the business. Appreciate you as always. Live at Drew's house, Joppa Afternoon Drive from our studios in Newburyport. Thank you all. We'll see you next time.